Greetings from Los Angeles. Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. So just now, I've just finished the video discussions on this wonderful Criterion set, Pasolini 101. And so thank you so much for those who have watched those videos. There are a lot of them, in fact. So I'm sorry if I tested your patience to the limit on that. And if I went overboard, I apologize for that. But I do want to thank you, and maybe let me just end with a little bit of a bonus video. I'm not so good when it comes to ranking titles, my favorite titles or my favorite films. It's very difficult, and the reason is because I have such a difficult time trying to make up my mind and try to have a definitive list. So I don't usually do my favorites of a set or something. Sometimes I do, but not always. But this time I'd like to try. And so if it's okay with you, as a type of bonus video, I'd like to present my ranking of my favorite films in the Pasolini 101 set from 9 to 1, and 1 indicating my absolute favorite from this set. So, so there are 9 films. And so let me now present to you in a reverse order my favorite films from the Pasolini 101 set of the 9 films. So coming in at number 9, we have the film which is Love Meetings. So Love Meetings, I think, it's the catalog of the discussion, talking with people in various areas in public, in various cities and townscapes, etc., about aspects of sex and ideas about sex and morality, sex and politics, sex and identity, etc. And so sex and family, sex and relationships. So it's very important in the context of Pasolini's works because sex and sexual politics and sexual identity and expression is very important when thinking about the themes and concerns of Pasolini's filmography writ large. So it's very significant in that way. I think maybe the reason why I've put it at number 9 rather than somewhat higher at the list is maybe for me it is I do find other works by Pasolini to be, on a personal level, even that more engaging. So, but that's not to take anything away from, I think, the grace and respect and overall feelings that one gets, and this is also showing, I think, the humanism of Pasolini, which I think is very important to emphasize, in which this set Pasolini 101 does very well, which is Pasolini is so caring about what the individual's feelings are, what the individual's opinions are. And this can be maybe delineated maybe on class lines if one prefers that type of class-based interpretive approach. But even so, or perhaps because so, depending on one's point of view, there is this way that Pasolini as a filmmaker is seen in terms of his humanism and the care and attention he directs towards all of the people's opinions. There are some moments in the film where maybe he might seem a bit antagonistic towards some of the viewpoints approached. I mean, but even so, it's very veiled, and it still allows room for the people to speak. So, so overall, there's a room that he gives and allows for the expression of opinions, which I think is a very key component of Pasolini's work. So I don't want to suggest that Love Meetings at number 9 is a terrible film, but again, that's one of the catch-22s, is it not, of making rankings. There always has to be one that falls at the very bottom of the list, so to speak. But just because it's at the bottom of this list doesn't make it an absolute terrible film. I think it's so important within Pasolini's works, and I do want to emphasize it. But for me, again, for purposes of today, number 9 is Love Meetings. And then continue on number 8, we have the film which is Medea. This is the film which is from the tail end of the 1960s and starring Maria Callas, among others. The Euripides as the basis of the play, the classical text at the basis for the cinematic adaptation. I find it to be very rewarding and very rich and earthy, which I find very much, even in the context of the quote-unquote classical adaptations, end quote. So there is a real reach here, and the depth of emotion is quite astounding. I would say that perhaps maybe the reason why it's not higher on the list for me is, again, not to any fault or any deficiency in the performance. I think, for instance, Maria Callas's performance is incredible, grandiose, broad in scope, brilliant close-ups, and the way that certain aspects of the supernatural and myth and magic are employed, as well as reminding us of the earthy nature of the film aesthetic, reliance on art and architecture from various parts of the world, mind you. Very fascinating potpourri mix. I would perhaps say that maybe there are so many extremes. There are so many extremes in this that perhaps I am reminded too of the wonderful grace notes that we had seen in, say, other films by Pasolini that I might consider my favorites, where there's also room for those quieter moments of, for lack of a better phrase, a type of serenity. While those are not absent from a film like Medea, I would say that they aren't part of the prime motivation of the action. And so maybe this is a film that, in a lot of ways, could be said to be a film of extremes. And perhaps that's fitting too, because it is falling in many contexts at the tail end of the 60s. So in many ways, it's kind of a bookmarking of a career up to that point. But that being said, I do enjoy those sorts of moments of serenity. But that's also a great way to say that for those who enjoy a film of, say, certain points of psychological extremity, I think this is a film that has that and then some. So for me, in terms of my own favorites ranking, number 8 is Medea. Number seven is another classical text adapted to the cinema in the hands of Pasolini. And this is Oedipus Rex. And I think it, for me, maybe edges out the Medea adaptation just slightly in terms of the favorites list, at least at this point in time. Maybe for a number of reasons. I do like the interplay between past and present. You know, this film does have its body focusing in on the classical adaptation, but it does have some interplay with present-day contemporary scenes in, I think, a fascinating way. And that juxtaposition, is not always ever present. So, not ever present, but obvious. So it has room for interpretation, which I really enjoy. And we do see the employment of scenes, especially the scenes or themes about parents and children, motherhood, and how we are reminded of certain important aspects, crucial aspects of Pasolini's biography, as well as bibliography, I suppose, but biography. So this is a key work in that respect. The theatrical design, when it reaches those heights, again, become very stylized. And so I enjoy those very much. But I always find, I find this work to be, again, it seems to also want or need or be required to, perhaps, to be faithful to a certain text or body, which again maybe along the same lines of Medea, which is why I think I've grouped them similarly on this list. While I do admire and appreciate that, I also like the type of this sense of the maybe capturing of maybe sort of the free-form nature of this, which has a sort of flow to it, and the acts of serenity, which I think I punctuate a lot of the works that I consider my absolute favorites. While they are here in a work like Oedipus Rex, again, this is a film that I think going for extremes, another film of extremes, which is a great thing. But again, that is my own personal approach to this. So for me, my number 7 on this list is Oedipus Rex. Number 6 is a work that is coming earlier in the Pasolini canon. And I should say that while this might be my number 9, number 8, number 7, number 6, etc., that does not mean that these are in any way terrible films from my vantage point. On the contrary, this is just the nature of lists. You know, I can't have everything at number 1. So this is one of the things that I find very difficult about making lists. But again, that's also part of the challenge of the exercise. So with that in mind, number 6, it's such a great film. This is a film which is Mama Roma, and this is, you know, carried on by the central performance here by Anna Magnani, and her focus here is quite distinct and quite intense. And this is I think the structure is essentially around her and around her feelings and exposure to the environment, as well as her reactions to things that are going on. So in many ways, it has that structure and feel, and it's crucial, and it operates so successfully in that way. There are times when it might feel like it is emphasizing that instead of emphasizing on, say, some of the other quote-unquote real neo-realism aspects. But there again, you have this wonderful dialogue between the Italian neo-realism that, in fact, she represents in terms of her illustrious career on the one hand, but now she's at the point where, paradoxically, she is so famous. In many ways, it is she is representing and contradicting that focus at the very same time. So that's really fascinating. Again, it's always challenging for me to wrap my head around that every time I watch this film. But that's not. I don't want to say that that is in any way a detriment, but it is one of the great challenging focal points of this film. But I would say that for me, yes, Mama Roma is number 6. And then number 5, we get to the top 5. Number 5 is Akatone. Very close in years to Mama Roma, but this is, of course, the first feature film directed by Pasolini. And it starts off the bat with concepts of death and destruction. From the very beginning, he's focusing on these themes. From the very opening lines of dialogue, he's focusing on these scenes. And it's quite remarkable how we have this idea of sainthood and salvation in the context of, quote-unquote, the working classes, or the quote-unquote scum of the streets, end quote. And I use air quotes very, very delicately here, because that's not Pasolini's intention to attach a type of two-dimensional label on the people like Akatone and the other people that we meet. On the contrary, that's the whole point of this film, is to show the opposite, to show the human side, warts and all, weaknesses and all, and wherein the question lies: is salvation possible even for those who are social outcasts or social misfits? Excuse me. And I think the film answers that in a very profound way. So, number 5 is Akatone. Number 4, and this is the Gospel according to Matthew. And I mentioned before how we have adaptations of classical texts that, for Medea and Oedipus Rex, were mentioned elsewhere. Here, it could be said that the Gospel according to Matthew is in that same or similar vein in terms of a cinematic adaptation of the biblical text, the Gospel of Matthew. And so in that way, it is an adaptation. But there is a sense of this way in which it is an adaptation that is adhering to the story of Christ, but also adhering to it in a way that feels very real. And I don't want to say documentary or quasi-documentary, but it has that sense of such directness that it feels so close and intimate. And there's none of that divide of a sense of theatricality, which I think is a real strength of this film. And it's that lack of a divide that I think creates a sense of earnest, subtle quiet, which operates so powerfully as well. Again, not to take anything away from other films that are quote-unquote lingering in terms of showing the extremities of emotional, psychological outbursts, which I think are very, very important and really well realized. There's something very powerful here about this, again, in the context of the story of Christ. So for me, number 4 is the Gospel according to Matthew. Now we're down to the final 3. And so number 3, in terms of my favorites in Pasolini's works, in Pasolini 101, number 3 is The Hawks and the Sparrows. And so this is such a great, quirky, funny, tongue-in-cheek film that is playing with different forms of theater and absurdist, say, sketch comedy, and dealings with religion and spirituality, the great duo of Toto and Davoli. And this is so wonderful. It has a liveliness and the quirkiness of the imagery, talking animals and birds, and the way that it jumps back and forward in various times and scenarios. Life and death is also spoken about. The cinematography, there's a way in which this is in many ways a type of drastic shift in terms of cinematography that seems very stylized. So it's heading in a direction while also having a sense of almost the body comedy that is a part of this. So it's a jaunt, it's a type of riot, and also it has the sensibilities of Pasolini's cinema philosophy down to a T. This is a great work, which is my number 3 favorite film in this set, which is The Hawks and the Sparrows. And now number 2 and number 1. So my number 2 favorite work in this set, Teorema. Teorema is a challenging work. It's difficult. It requires multiple viewings, as do I think all these other films by Pasolini. But for some reason, Teorema, it's a film that I think is so cryptic and enigmatic. It offers itself to a wide variety of interpretations, each of which is correct. You know, it's one of those sorts of films. So in that way, it has such a great strength and beauty and grace and mystery, and it has a type of calm solemnity on its surface, but it is also acerbic and aggressive and really biting, satirical as well as grating. And I think that is on purpose, and it has a venom to it, which is, it sneaks up on you, and then when it stings, it really stings. And even when it stings, one wonders, in terms of the interpretive qualities of that and the enigma and mystery, what things mean. Things mean something else, or characters stand in for something else. What does the significance of this person mean? So that kind of interplay is ongoing throughout. It serves as a type of puzzle, as a type of labyrinth, and every time I watch it, it offers something new. It does every time. It is so captivating and alluring. You also feel a sense of danger and threat. That's the greatness of Pasolini, how everything can be boxed in so much and yet still be so free form to be exposed to many forms of interpretation by many people. So this is my number 2 film for that reason, and then some. What a brilliant work of art this is. This is Teorema. Which leaves my number 1 film, and so I haven't mentioned it yet. So for those who know of what the films are in the set, you'll know that my number 1 favorite film in this set is Por Chile. Por Chile is my number 1 favorite film in this. It could be, again, it's always hard to think about Pasolini's films overall, writ large, but in terms of this set, yes, it is brilliant. It is deadly. It is talking about history in a way that is that might be insulting, that might be considered provocative, shocking, and it's from the perspective of a type of nobility or landed nobility class, or new money class. The rise of the industrialized wealth that is again usurping this sort of Marxist ideal, utopian ideal that we might have seen in Pasolini's films, from Acatone to Mamma Roma to Love Meetings to The Gospel According to Matthew, even all the way up to The Hawks and the Sparrows. But around this time, we're seeing maybe an erosion or destruction of those adherents to a type of hope or optimism towards these Marxist utopian ideals. And when we get to a film like Por Chile, we can see the destruction of that hope, I think, emphasized and circled and highlighted. And even in this double structure too, which is fascinating in and of itself. We have the whims of Pasolini inviting us to interpret what the relationship is, if any, between these two separate lines. But I think I hold to my own personal view that they both show in their own way the destruction of the utopian ideal. And then you throw into this mix aspects of, say, cannibalism and bestiality, and becomes this really, it becomes this mix of ideas that, when they are compounded and gathered together, it forms a really challenging, disturbing set of questions and propositions. So, and it is very acerbic, very, very mean. And it leaves no stone unturned in terms of its targets. So It is a brilliant work of art, and there's so much about the spoken word. There's so much about what is described, which I think is done in a very artful way. It's done in a way that I think is very cunning, is also very cruel indeed. So what a film this is. It is a dark film, and it's so captivating and challenging, and in many ways it forms a great way, a close or a penultimate close to the 60s output of Pasolini. What a film this is. My favorite film from this Pasolini 101 set, and it is Porcile. So yes, that is my list. Again, I apologize. My list might be different from your list. Again, if you disagree with anything I say, I don't mean any offense. No offense meant at all. But you might have a different list than I. So if you do, if you want to share with me your list, that's fine. Now, I tried to think also in the context of Pasolini's other works outside of the set, but I thought that was too much of a challenge for me, and I also wanted to be sure that I focused in on the Pasolini 101 set. Again, that was the nature of the discussion series. So, but just suffice to say that I have seen the other Pasolini films. And maybe one day we might do a comprehensive Pasolini discussion. But for now, in the context of Pasolini 101, that's how I feel. At least today. My list might change an hour from now, a week from now, tomorrow, a month from now, who knows. But at least now, that's how I feel. And again, I don't want to say that my number 9 film is a terrible film. On the contrary, this had to come somewhere. That's one of the tricky things about lists like this. Something has to always come at the end. So I don't want to take anything away from the greatness that is Love Meeting, again, for the reasons that I tried to cite before, but for also reasons that I tried to express today. That's my list. So if you want to share with me your lists, please feel free to do so in the comment section below. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. This was a little bonus video. I hope it was okay. But until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.